webcast, you can go to microsoft.com/webcasts. And thanks again for joining us for today's MSDN webcast, a lap around HTML5, adding functionality and style with JavaScript and CSS3. It's now my pleasure to hand it over to your presenter, Lindsay Lindstrom. Lindsay, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric. Well, welcome everyone to our second part of this four-part series, introducing some concepts around HTML5 and all that entails. If you missed the last session, you could go to MSDN webcast and you will see a link at the end and view that session on demand as well. So with me today, I have Tara Walker. She will also be talking about some of these new features in HTML5 and its relations, I should say. And so Tara, say hi.
Hi, everyone, and I'll be fielding your questions as well. So
yeah. And both Tara and I are academic evangelists with Microsoft in the eastern part of the United States. So if you have any questions regarding today's webcast or anything around Microsoft's development, or if you're involved in education in any way, whether you're a teacher or a student, please feel free to reach out to us and we can help you implement some of these technologies in your courses. So you can contact us via our emails, which are on the screen, as well as our blog addresses and Twitter. So if you take a look at our blogs, you'll be able to get at the content that we talked today and throughout our series. So just to recap a little bit from our last time, HTML5 is one word to describe a lot of things that people are using. So you can say HTML5, and that just could mean the markup, that HTML markup, the newest version that has been in development since about 2006 and is slated for completion in 2022. So that's a pretty long time. However, when people usually say HTML5, they really mean this whole family of technologies that work together to apply some new functionality for our sites and give our users a great experience. So not only do they talk about HTML5, the markup, but JavaScript, Cascading style sheet, and some APIs that we can use, as well as some graphics information. So this slide is just showing you a little bit about how HTML5 is being developed by one of the organizations. It's the World Wide Web Consortium. At the top, W3C, as well as ECMA on the right-hand side. There are different working groups involved in the organization, involved in the development of these technologies. We have a working group around HTML, CSS, web apps, geolocation, ECMAScript 262, which is working on the next JavaScript, and SVG for scalable vector graphics. Below that, with all these pretty colors, you see the different specifications that are being currently developed and worked on by lots of these different members in the working groups. And they're all at different stages in development right now. And this is why I'm saying 2022, because that's when we expect everything to be in green and final recommendations. However, that doesn't mean today. There's a lot that has already been implemented, and the slide's probably already out of date because it's changing all the time. So you can still apply this functionality on your website. Different browsers are at different stages of implementing these specifications. The way Microsoft is working is Internet Explorer 9 does implement a bunch of HTML5 features. The ones that were baked at the time that IE9 was released. IE10, which is currently in Platform Preview 2. And you can take a look at that. There's a link in the slide deck, ietestdrive.com. You can take a look at some what's included in IE10 and also play around with it if you have the Windows 8 developer preview. And you can see some of the additional HTML5 and family features implemented in that. And then we have another site called HTML5 Labs, where you can take a look at some of the specifications that are really in their early stages. So Microsoft's strategy is, we wanted to make sure things were stable before we really implemented them in the browser, because if their specifications are changing all the time, then the sites that you develop will continue to break, or the features on those sites will break as the specifications change. So we want stability is what Microsoft was going for, and different browsers had different strategies around it. Anyway, so that's kind of the landscape, and we're going to talk in this webcast, a bit more about cascading style sheets and JavaScript. In our last webcast, we talked more about HTML5 markup. I will also discuss actually, I'll just show you some geolocation, web storage, and some tools to work with HTML5. So this slide is just showing you a little bit about kind of the sweet spot of using all these different technologies to create a great site. So the markup works well with JavaScript and styling around that. So if your page, your website is in that sweet spot where all three come together in this Venn diagram, you're in a good place. So all of these individually are changing and have great features, but they really shine when they're all together. So let's start off with CSS, Cascading Style Sheets. So in CSS3, as it's being developed, there's a bunch of new different modules that allow us to have more control and have great styling, including backgrounds and borders. So being able to have a border radius and have rounded edges to our content, which is great. That's one thing that's always been asked for. Applying some opacity to our backgrounds, whether it's an opacity, setting the opacity, or by using our setting our background RGB values to include an RGBA value, which is A for the alpha channel, so you can have some opacity. We have the introduction of new fonts, including fonts that are WOF fonts, which stands for Web Open Form font format. So think about this: if you're creating a site and you have a specific font that you really like that you would love on your page, what if your user doesn't have it installed on their machine? If it's a unique font, likely they won't. So how do you get your text to display as you want it to in design? Well, WOF allows us to go out and pull down this open font format, and CSS therefore allows us to pull it down live and use it in our styling. So therefore, every user sees our page as we intend as a developer versus depending on whatever font they have on their systems. We also have media queries. Media queries are really cool. They allow us to manipulate our CSS based on what's happening with our page, and I'll show you an example of that. You can work with selectors in CSS, which is great. Box shadow, that's something people have been asking for. So you can actually apply some shadowing to something, so it looks a lot cooler. And even 2D and 3D transforms and transitions, which you can do in CSS. So let's take a look at some of that. So I'm going to share out my desktop. And yep, we're in the right solution. Let me know if no one can see that. But I don't have any code on the page yet, but hopefully you should see Visual Studio. And you will get at all this code. It is already live, and you'll see a link in the slides. So let's talk about which one should we do first? Let's talk about border box shadows and such first. So on this page, we have our HTML, HTML5, and we set the title, and we have a styling section. So in CSS, we are styling a div and paragraph tags. In our div, we are giving it a background URL to this test.png file, margin and padding as per standard. And you see noted by these comments that we're using a couple new properties. Border radius, so we get a rounded edge, and a box shadow, so giving it a size, how far I want it to come out, as well as the proper color. For a paragraph tag, color, font size, weight, all good stuff. But we have the ability to set the opacity. In this case, we're setting it to 0.6, so you can kind of see through it. And then even with our background, setting our RGBA values. Notice that the opacity is set to, the alpha channel is set to 1 there. So we can play with the opacity either through this or through the opacity. It's your choice. And then in our body, we just have those divs and those paragraph tags. So let's take a look at that. And you see we have fun. So hello webcam. We have our div that's taking up the whole page, and we set our background PNG, which is this checkered element. And you see that that div has a radius, corner radius around the corner, as well as the box shadow. Then within that, we have our paragraph tag that says hello webcam. And you see that our text is a little bit opaque, because you can see somewhat the squares behind, see through the squares. And if we messed around with our CSS, we could change that. So one way we could do this is by closing the page and then changing our styling and reviewing the page. But one great thing, I'm just going to open this full page fully, that we have in Internet Explorer, with Internet Explorer 8 and above, the developer tools. So you can either go to the tools menu and open it up there, or press F12. And we have IE developer tools. So this allows us to inspect a lot of stuff on our page. So we can take a look at all the markup and the styling that's been applied to that markup, as well as, let's use the selector tool. So I can select elements. So if I go to my page and I select an element, you can see that I've selected the paragraph tag in this case. If I selected something on my markup, you can see the blue box that selects it on my page. So this is a really neat way for us to inspect what's happening. The other good thing is we can see the styling that is being applied on the different elements of my page as well. So I'm in the paragraph tag, and on the right-hand side, we can see different styling that has happened. If I had style that was being, this is a pretty simple page, but if we had styling that was being overridden at a different level, you would see it crossed out. But in this case, we just see all the styling that is applied to that paragraph tag. I can also inspect it by looking at all the styling from my page. There's a few other things there's a lot of other stuff that this IE developer tools can do, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But including with the JavaScript, seeing what is on your page, debugging that JavaScript, profiling what the user is doing. So if I click Start Profiling and I went around and worked on my page, I would see the actions that the user is pulling in the JavaScript, if we had JavaScript on a page that was running, and how long it took for it to run and execute, and whatever functions are being called, as well as whatever sub-functions that function was called. We can even profile what's happening over the network. So any images or data or videos that it's pulling down, we can see how long that retrieval takes and what we can do to speed it up. So that's just a quick glance at the developer tools in Internet Explorer. Another one is, I mentioned the WOF, Web Open Font Formats, and in this case, we have a body tag with our H1 header tag. We've given a class called Font Face, so we can work with it in CSS. In my Font Face class, you see that I've set the font to a certain size, and also the type, the name of the font is 3 Dumb Regular, which doesn't sound like a typical font we'd have on our machine, but of course we usually set some defaults to fall back to, including sans serif or serif at the very end, because they should have some level of fonts installed. However, just because our user doesn't have that installed on the machine doesn't mean that we're stuck. So we can use the ability to get at some new fonts, and this is what WOF allows us to do. So in this case, we're giving it a font family name of 3 Dumb Regular, and we're setting the source. In this case, we're using a URL to get at a local file in my project on my machine. You could also put a URL here that points out to a site, on the web. Gosh, I'm blanking on the name of really good, but just to search for WOF fonts, and you'll find a few sites on the web that give you some. And so we'll pull down that font should my user not have it on the machine, and then we could see it. So if I ran that one, you should see my Hello WOF font in a fun font. Lastly, media queries, which are pretty neat. So take a look at this, the HTML. And at the very bottom you see we just have a div. And this div has a class called box. We take a look at that styling applied to my box. I see that I have pretty standard, no repeat, width and height, and we're setting the background image to a local JPEG. Then we're using media queries, which are denoted by this @media, to figure out what's changing on my media and change the styling accordingly. So in this case, we're saying if the width, the minimum width and the maximum width, if it's between 450 pixels and 500 pixels, then I'm going to change the URL of my background image and even the height and the width. And we do that a few times depending on some different conditions, between 500 and 600, between 600 and 700, and then minimum with anything above 700. So we're changing the image all those different times. So if I ran that, you should see my default image. Because it's minimum width of 700, it was the one on the bottom. But if I were to change the width by moving my browser shape, let's see where I'm going to hit it. Oh, I hit it, and it changed the background image. And that's pretty cool. So media queries allow us to change our styling, even including the background image, based on what's happening to it on the page. That's pretty cool. So, all right, let me go back to let me close these out. Go back to my slides. Can we see the slides? Hopefully I'm back on my slides.
Yeah, you're back on the slides.
Great, thank you. And I showed you quickly the IE Dev tools by pressing F12, but you have allowed to inspect the different elements on your page, the CSS, the markup, even the JavaScript, and I talked a little bit about profiling your users' actions and scripts that are running, as well as the network traffic. Another thing you can do, I forgot to mention, is that with these tools you can play around with the type of browser that would be viewing your page and the different doc types that the page might have on it, or how the browser is reacting to it. So you can see if there are any quirks or anything like that that you need to handle, depending on your browser. So just ran through it really quickly, but this is just Rachel Appel, another teammate of ours. This is her site, her blog, and you can see that the styling on the right-hand side in the lower pane, CSS is crossed out due to overridden styles, and allows you to inspect the HTML and CSS. I showed you a little bit more. Full control over the browser, so you can see what am I using and how is my website reacting. And even inspect the tools and the scripts and the traffic. Okay, so I showed you more than that. All right, to learn more about the IE Dev tools, because it actually would make a whole great other webcast. Rachel did a post series on it, and Chris Bowen, both of these guys, Rachel and Chris, are on our extended team here. And Chris did a 4-part series on the IE Dev tools that is really good. So go out to the link here and go through that blog series. All right, let's talk a bit more about JavaScript. So ECMAScript 5, or JavaScript 5, implements a few new things that make it a lot easier to work with our JavaScript, as well as the document object model. So JavaScript has been around for a while. I seem to find people either love it or they hate it, or somewhere in between. And Rachel likes to say JavaScript doesn't suck, it's the DOM that sucks, because JavaScript working with the DOM is sometimes hard to do, but hopefully it's a little bit easier with some of the new features of JavaScript 5, including the ability to add an event listener, so you can listen for a specific event to fire and react accordingly. Get element by your class name and not just by ID. There are a few new methods for working with arrays, and I'll show these off. There's an enhanced object model, because JavaScript is not an object-oriented language. This allows us to create an object, define properties of, which is really powerful instead of just using prototypes. I'll show you a little bit of that. And then some just seemingly simple computational methods that make our job a whole lot easier, including my favorite, string.trim. so that we, instead of having to parse through a string and use regular expressions to figure out what's there, we can just use string.trim to trim off the white space. So I think, I'll show you a demo of that right now before we go into the next part. So, share my desktop. Okay, so it's taking a look at the arrays is one of the first things I mentioned. So we're adding an event listener to the load function, and we're creating an array, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We can get the index of the fifth element, or get to the fifth element in the array, or index of the 5, which is the fourth element in my array. I'm sorry, they shouldn't have used 5 and 4. That just confused me, because an array, it starts at 0 indexed. So the 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gives us that result. We have the for each function. So for each element in my array, multiply by 3 in this case. We just create a quick little multiply function. So for every element in the array, it's going to do something. We have a every function, so we're going to check to see if something is even. And if we're going to check, is every element in my array even? Nope. We're going to say sum. So we're going to check, is our sum elements in my array even? The result is true. We can use map to go through our values and map them to something else. So in this case, we're going to negate them. So we're going to return the negative value. So map everything to a specific function. In this case, we're negating everything. Filter them by some conditions. So if something is less than 50, so filter the array to see if the elements are less than 50 and all of them are less than 50. And even reduce. So reduced diff allows us to reduce the differential between them. Previous value minus value. So that takes, 10 to 9, minus 9, minus 8, minus 7, yeah, all that, you get it, 53. So that's just some quick array stuff. Object model, this one's great. So typically, to create an object, we would, create a function called appointment and do whatever, dot prototype equals appointment, new appointment. We always did this, always use the prototypes. Now, we can just do object.create, which is awesome. And not only can we do object.create, something.create, we can set some properties on that. So instead of just doing these something.location.startTime, which declares and gives them some kind of value, define that property. So define the property, excuse me, of giving it the identifier and the value. So it acts more like objects that we're used to. For computational methods, so this is the little favorite thing, if we have this new string called temp, we put a lot of white space in there. But if we use string.trim, temp.trim, it removes the white spaces at the ends. We have date.now, so we can get the current date and time. The output, of course, will be different because it's a different date and time from when this was done. We can take the date and put it to isostring into something that is more easily understood and parsed by our code. We can even do date.parse. I think the slide says data.parse. I should have pointed that out, but date.parse. We can pass it in a string, and it will parse it into a date that we can understand UTC format. So those are just some quick computational methods that hopefully make your life a little bit simpler. Oops, sorry, I didn't switch to that content. Whoops. All right, now I'm going back to my slides. Okay, so let's talk about another thing to help in our JavaScript work, JavaScript libraries. And one such JavaScript library, probably the most popular one, is jQuery. So JavaScript, again, big language, pretty unwieldy. You're doing a lot of the same things over and over again in JavaScript, do something like get element by ID and then apply some script to that element to manipulate the DOM. And so jQuery allows us to do that more quickly and hopefully easier. It's a JavaScript library that's built with JavaScript, so it's definitely native to what JavaScript is. And again, as Rachel likes to say, it's not that JavaScript sucks. It's interacting with the document object model that sucks. So jQuery allows us to do that easier, so hopefully it sucks less for you. It's also really easy to use and extend. I'll show you how you can do that. A lot of it is just using jQuery to hack functionality into what you're trying to do. So a lot of copy and paste happening, which is the best way to code, right? Just kidding. And it's easy to extend as well. A lot of people take the base elements of jQuery and add them together to create some really snazzy acting controls for your page. There's a lot of plugins that people have written as well. So beyond jQuery 2, there's jQuery UI, which is applying some user interface, more kind of visual controls to your page. Let's take a look at jQuery. And I feel like one of the best ways to look at jQuery is to just go to the jQuery site. Let me just show you this really quickly. So in this site, oops, the wrong one, wrong Visual Studio window. So in the site that we have to demo some things off, we have a scripts folder, and in our scripts folder we have a lot of different JavaScript files, including jQuery and jQuery UI. This is a little bit older version of jQuery. So you can, when you're using jQuery, you can download the JavaScript files itself. There's different versions. There's kind of jQuery whatever, and then the version number .jas, and this is kind of all that script. As with white space, jQuery minimized is all the white space taken away, and then VS-Doc actually allows us to, because ASP.NET and jQuery work very well together. jQuery is a first-class citizen. Allows us to interact with jQuery in Visual Studio. So you can download these from jQuery.com. But another way to include jQuery libraries within your page or within your site is to use a constant delivery network, so you can always get served the most updated version. So that's just how you would start using jQuery in your site. And then, of course, reference that script in your HTML. So for instance, in this one, we have a script with our source of, it's pointing out actually to the jQuery site itself and getting the latest version of JavaScript. But you could also just point it out to the script locally in your project. But let me go to jQuery.com. And it's pretty easy to get at. You can download it from here. You can read tutorials, view some videos, get on the mailing list, get access to source code. Lots of great stuff. Find some books. But my favorite section is the documentation section. It's right at the top. So if you go to documentation, you not only can read about jQuery and using it with other libraries and some facts and everything, but you can get at the references for all the for the jQuery API, including finding out more about it. So let's take a look at these specs. Documentation. So you can see some of these different techniques for adding effects to our site. So these are in the jQuery library: animate, DQ, fade in, fade out. Let's take a look at fade in. So if you just click on one of those, you can see the description of that jQuery function. You can see the different, what it expects as parameters. So in this case, the duration of the fade in and any callback function once the fade in completes. You can read another override, even an easing function, so that your fade in happens, not in the same rate over the duration, but faster at the end, faster at the beginning, what have you, fast or slow. And you can even see some simple code as well as what it would look like as it goes through. My favorite thing on every single one of these in this documentation is the example section, because in the example section you can see the code that was written. So we have our body, a span with a few divs in it, and then a script that we're kind of writing in line. And this is jQuery. And in that jQuery, you see we have this document.body. So instead of using getElementById in JavaScript, jQuery simplifies it to this $sign. So, in this, we're trying to look for the body in our document, so the body tag. And if we click on that body, we are calling a function. Now you can you can create a function outside of this and then just call the name of that function. But you can also do this inline function and define it here. So we're saying in this div, look at the hidden first element and do the .fade in. And in this case, just passing in the word slow, because if you read the documentation at the top, you can see we can do this slowly, and that's it. So we can, and then the code is actually rendered in a demo on the bottom. So click here, and we see we're showing this first element. This it faded in for us. And you can do it up to 3 times in this demo if you took a look at the 3 different divs, 1, 2, 3. So it just shows us how it's working, and you can see a few other examples. And it faded in, over that, centered. And you can copy and paste this code and use it in your project. Of course, whenever you're doing that, you want to take a look at the licensing. But for the documentation purposes, the licensing is that you can use it. But don't believe me, check it out yourself. So that's just a great way to get started familiar with jQuery and start using it. jQuery also has a sister library for UI. So if you take a look at the jQuery.com, you can link to jQuery UI, but it's just jQueryUI.com that allows us to, kind of put all things together and create some powerful UI widgets and controls. So again, if you go to the demos and documentation page, you can see some of these behaviors and widgets, like a date picker even, some utilities for you creating the interactions yourself and effects. Let's take a look at a widget, the accordion widget. So in the accordion widget, you can see a little demo. So this is what an accordion would do. So different sections, and if you click on them, expands and contracts them or collapses them. So it gives you the markup and options and events and theming, how you can apply some styling to it, and also a link to view the source. So you can, again, take this code, copy and paste it, and see how it works. So this is the script itself, this function, which calls on this ID of accordion, calls .accordion. And then we go down to that div, so we're calling accordion on these different elements. And that's it. That's all we really had to do. And yeah, so you can just take that little bit of script, put it in there, depending on if you set up your page in the same way. So that's what I would do if I were you, to take a look at and learn jQuery and jQuery UI. Just go out to the respective sites and play around. Go back to my content. All right. Trying to move to the side. Okay, there we go. Another great feature of the whole world of HTML5, and if you remember in the big slide we had at the beginning, it's a little tiny sliver towards the right, is geolocation. So now you can figure out where your user is when they're visiting your page or your site, and react accordingly. So this is kind of creepy. We know where you are, and we can react. So you can get the current position, and then you can watch as they move. So here's a sample bit of code. So you would, in JavaScript, you would request their position, and you'd use a nav.geolocation to get at that. So then once you have their location, you can get their current position, and this accepts a couple of functions. The function for if you did get their current position, and a function for if you didn't get their current position. And if you don't get their current position, or there's a few ways that it will error out. Excuse me. There's a few different ways it will error out. Either you couldn't get their position, maybe they're not, for some reason, it can't be retrieved, or if they denied your site access to their location, because every time you do this, you have to warn the user or ask the user to opt in to giving you their location. So I'll show you how to implement that. Okay. So one thing I pointed out in the last session, but there's a site out there called HTML5demos.com. There's a bunch of sites that exist to help you out in learning HTML5 and the various components of CSS and JavaScript and all that good stuff. So we have a bunch of resource links on this slide deck as well as from the slides from our last session. But HTML5demos.com is a good site because it tells you, let me scroll up to the top, some demos of HTML5 technologies, and you can filter them by different things like geolocation and WebSockets and events and video and audio and all that good stuff. You can also filter them by different browsers and where they stand in supporting that. And it's not about necessarily that it doesn't support it. Again, the specifications change all the time, so maybe they support, a specification at a certain point. So geolocation is one such demo. So if I click on that, first of all, you'll see at the bottom of my screen, it says HTML5demos.com wants to track your physical location. You can allow it for once. You can always allow. You can deny it. So let's allow it once. And now we see my location. So it tells me I found you and points out to where I am. And the way it finds really where you are is it can do a few different things. It can use your ISP if you're connecting from a cell phone using an HTML5 browser, capable browser with geolocation capable HTML5 browser. It might use cell phone towers or the GPS on your cell phone. It depends whatever capabilities that device has and that the browser has access to on that device. We'll show you where you are. That's pretty cool. And if I go back to this, let me show you a little bit of code on that. So in this case, it's just the same as the code that I was calling on or showed you on the slide, but you can listen for the position. You can get the location and watch their position. Excuse me. You can set up the success callback and error callback. And I just wanted to point out, so in this case, if they found the location, the success is that we're setting the text to a specific label on our page to have the latitude and longitude of where we are. For the error callback, again, there are a few different ways you can error out. The website doesn't have permission. You can't figure out the position, or that there was a timeout as they were trying to figure out the position. So it can happen on a few different things. And so you can handle different ways that it fails, as well as, a default error handling. So if I ran that real quick, can clear mark latitude and longitude. It'll say, I want to, do you want to do this? And if you plugged in that latitude and longitude to a map, you'll see that I'm somewhere in the middle of Pennsylvania. One of the last things we'll talk about once I get back to my slides is web storage. So this is another great aspect of the Web API working group. And so web storage, or you can consider it DOM storage, allows us to persist data from our page with our document, with our JavaScript objects. So, we can kind of do this in the world of cookies. So we can take some data and save it for, like, based on our user, login information, etc., settings on the site, and persist that, but there's definitely a limit to how much data a cookie can hold. So you can think of web storage more like cookie plus plus, but really more of a better way to think about it is a whole lot of cookies, the whole shelf, or the way I like to say it, cake instead of cookies, a little bit more. Web storage APIs are implemented in a lot of different browsers, including IE, IE8 and above. So it's one of those pretty stable aspects, specifications I should say. And there are a couple different flavors of web storage. There's session storage and local storage. Session storage, it works for the session, for that browser session, that window or the tab that you're using. And once that session is over, the data goes away. So it's short-term persisted. And so those values that are saved to session storage are only visible from that window or tab that created them. So if you wanted to, so if you refresh, you'll still see that session because you're in that same window. But if you close out that session, that data is gone. Local storage, this is kind of where it's the whole cake and not the cookies, is a long-term. So it behaves like a cookie. It doesn't just live within that single browser session. The values persist beyond. However, all the only how you can get at the data in that local storage can only be from anything that comes from the same origin. So basically, you know, if you have multiple tabs open in your browser and they're all pointing to the same domain, the same site, all those browser tabs can get at that data. But if you were coming from something outside of that scope, from maybe another machine, of course, this kind of makes sense because it's a different machine, you can only get at that data, you can't get at that data. So only from the same origin. Or if you're going to browse out to a different site in a different tab and then try and go back, you're not going to be able to get to that storage. So I'll show you the code behind that because it is pretty simple. Kara, do you have anything to add? I feel like I'm stealing all the thunder, but
no, you're doing so well. I don't want to interrupt your flow. Keep going. No.
That's okay. Interrupt if you want. All right. So again, on our HTML5demos.com site, we have an example of storage. So let's click on that. And session storage and web storage. So if you look at this, you see that my session storage is empty, and my local storage has my name in it, Lindsay. And this is because it's been persisted over my different browser sessions. The last time I opened this was, I think, last night, and I typed in Lindsay. So let me try this again. I'll type in, I don't know what to type in. I'm going to type in Eric's name here in session storage. And then I'm going to type in Tara's name in local storage. So there it is. It's done. I'm going to refresh the page. And so we see that the session storage holds Eric, and the local storage holds Tara, like we would expect. But if I opened up this same page in a new tab, we'll see that the session storage is empty, and the local storage still has Tara in it because it's a different session, but it's the same origin. So we do get a Tara, but because it's a different session, we don't get access to Eric's name. And then, of course, you can clear it. And now if I refreshed it, that's interesting. Maybe that's a little bit broken. But if you cleared that storage, it should have cleared out Eric's name. Oh, I forgot to show you this in media queries. So backtrack just a second. Media query.es, so media queries with a period before the ES. These are a bunch of examples of sites that have used media queries to render their format on the page. So take a look at that. All right. Just take a look at the code behind. So for local storage, in this case, we are going to, oops, I didn't want to show you that one. Here we go. So in this case, we are calling, we just have an HTML page here, and this page is using MVC with MVVM, or actually Model View Controller design patterns to separate our concerns and separate our content from our scripting. So we just have a section here, semantic tag, rendering the body of our page. But I just want to point out that we're calling out to our web session storage JavaScript. Excuse me. Where is that? My script folder. So take a look at web storage JavaScript. This is our local storage. So we're using jQuery here to see if we have, to get the current page count. We're setting the page count part of our page to be the current page count of our page. We can clear the storage. So to the click event, we're saying local storage.clear. But we could also do, local storage.add or what have you. For session storage, we have checking the page count, doing the same thing. So just showing you that with jQuery and web storage, you can make powerful companions. Let me close all that. I'm sorry, I like a clean IDE. I don't like opening up all these tabs and then not having them close. Okay. Lastly, before we wrap up, and we might get done a couple minutes early, let's talk about the actual development experience of HTML5 enabled sites. Of course, you can use Visual Studio to create HTML5 sites, but again, Visual Studio 2010 came out in 2010, so HTML5 was at a certain point at that time. So with Service Pack 1, there was some more support around, specifically more around JavaScript to apply some, IntelliSense and highlighting, all that good stuff to our JavaScript. But if you've noticed at all during the demos that I was showing you, there were some, in Visual Studio that I was showing you, there were some squiggly lines and stuff under some of my code, and that was because I don't necessarily have all the right tools installed for Visual Studio 2010 to be able to understand all the stuff I've been showing you. And that just shows you that this HTML5 and this JavaScript, you just need a typing surface. So you can create sites in Notepad, in Visual Studio, in something like Web Matrix. So you can easily use any tool to just write some text. A lot of people end up kind of using, simple text editor and then validating their JavaScript or their HTML5 on one of these many helper sites that exist out there, like JSLint or JSHint. So just copying and pasting to those tools. However, we also do have extensions to Visual Studio that really allow you to manipulate and work with your CSS and HTML5 and JavaScript. So we do that. You can get at those extensions through the Extensions Manager in Visual Studio. So if you were to go out to Visual Studio, just go to the Tools menu. And if you go to Tools, you can find the Extension Manager. And that'll take you out to the Extensions Gallery that we have for Visual Studio. And take a look at all the different extensions you can do there. There are a few popular ones, I'm trying to think of some of the names. Another place you can go to get at those extensions is if you just look at Visual Studio Gallery on MSDN. So just do a search with Bing for Visual Studio Gallery on MSDN, and you can see a whole lot of different extensions to Visual Studio that people have developed. You can also NuGet, which is great. It's just straight from Visual Studio, get out that package and have it installed and extended.
Yeah, some of the packages, just as some of the more popular ones, are, for instance, we're talking about JavaScript and HTML5 here. There is an actual Web Essentials.
Yeah, that's it. Web Essentials.
That
Thanks
you
for
can
that.
use.
Yeah.
The NuGet package is something that's also an extension, so you can make sure you have that as a part of Visual Studio to install that. And again, the online gallery will give you much more, JScript editor and the like. So just know that if you really want to have this experience in JavaScript, there is even a mobile-ready HTML5 one. I mean, CSS cop. There's so many that will help you with this experience. So take advantage of those extensions.
Yeah, Microsoft has developed them. Our partners like Component One has developed a bunch, and anybody can develop one and add them in. The link I remember is visualstudiogallery.msdn.microsoft.com if you just wanted to browse out to that page. And you can take a look at all the different extensions there. So that is a great one. Of course, you can use the IE developer tools to take a look at what's going on your page and in your site. So we talked a little bit about that. Another great tool I didn't point out yet was Modernizer. So Modernizer is also a JavaScript library. I just go to just modernizer.org, I believe it is. Modernizer. It's .com. I always think it's .org. I don't know why, because it provides such a great service. I always think it's .org. But basically, it allows us to see the different what capabilities of HTML5 CSS that our browser can understand. So, or whatever browser our users are using can understand. So you can see, does this browser that I'm using understand these media queries? Or does it understand the new box shadows that we just discussed in CSS? So you can download Modernizer, and you can even customize what elements you're trying to test against of Modernizer and download it, and see, based on whatever browser you're using, Modernizer does feature detection to figure out if it would support what you're using on your site. So Modernizer is a great one. Take a look at it. Modernizer.com, just the E, M-O-D-E-R-N-I-Z-R. That's not the typo on the screen. So here's just a couple of screenshots of using HTML5 and such in Visual Studio. So if you have ASP.NET MVC 3 installed on Visual Studio, those tools installed, when you're creating in this case, a new internet application, you can see a checkbox that asks you if you want to use HTML5 tick markup. This is what it will look like. You've seen a little bit of this MV3 application. And you can see that it's highlighting appropriately what we're doing. It understands sections and footers and nav semantic elements without giving us any angry squiggly lines. You can also see for CSS3, you can see what Visual Studio understands around what's going on with what's new in CSS3. It gives us some squiggly lines because it is telling us for border radius specifically, different browsers can understand it a little bit differently. That's why we have the -mos section. So therefore, border radius is kind of handled a little bit differently currently in the different browsers. This is where the specification is always changing. This shows you, which we already took a look at, the libraries in our Solution Explorer, in our script folder. In this case, jQuery as well as Modernizer. And then also in our options of our Visual Studio, we can see under the HTML section, what version of HTML that my project is targeting. In this case, HTML5. So you can choose to validate against the schema of HTML. Lastly, you can get some help with entablishments and such and snippets to see. We can see in this one, since it's just the top of the article, we can at the top of the alphabet, you can see the semantic tag of article as well as the semantic tag of aside implemented, and the new HTML5 tag of audio, are all here within the snippets manager. And with that, that was pretty much it for this session. I'm done a couple minutes early, so I'd like to open it up for any questions that anybody has. So we'll take a look right now. I don't see any questions in the queue. I'll give you a second. And also be sure to check out our last session, introducing the world of HTML5. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Eric if there are no questions. And Eric, take it away.
Yeah, so what everybody should be seeing in your slide area now is a survey. Please take some time to fill it out before you go. We really appreciate your feedback. You'll notice there are a couple links directly on the slide you can click on that'll take you to the survey. With that, I do want to thank Lindsay and Tara for presenting today, and thank you all for attending today's webcast. This concludes today's MSDN webcast. You may now disconnect from the audio portion of this conference.